My name is Ryan Coleman, and for 11 years, I thought I knew everything about my wife. I thought I knew the way she took her coffee black, no sugar, but only before noon. I thought I knew the small scar above her left eyebrow was from a bicycle accident when she was 9. I thought I knew her laugh, the real one, the one that came out only when she wasn't trying to be polite. I thought I knew her secrets. I was wrong about that last part. Dead wrong. Sarah and I met in college, got married 3 years later, and built what most people would call an enviable life. A house in a quiet neighborhood outside Denver. 2 kids, Lily, 9, and Noah, 6. She worked part-time as a freelance graphic designer. I managed operations for a logistics company downtown. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. We had Sunday pancakes. We had a dog named Biscuit. We had, as far as I could tell, a normal, happy, slightly boring suburban life. Looking back now, I realize the cracks were always there. I just didn't know how to read them. Sarah traveled for work more than most freelance designers did. 2, sometimes 3 trips a month, always to the same general area, a cluster of towns about 4 hours south of us, near the Colorado-New Mexico border. She said she had a client there, a boutique hotel chain that needed rebranding work, and that the client insisted on in-person meetings. I never questioned it. Why would I? She always came back exhausted, a little distant for a day or two, and then back to normal. I chalked it up to the drive. She also had a second phone. A cheap prepaid one, kept in the glove compartment of her car. When I found it once, years ago, cleaning out the car before a road trip, she said it was for work emergencies, something her business insurance required for client confidentiality. I believed her. I had no reason not to. That's the thing about trust. It's not stupidity. It's just what love looks like when you're not paying attention to the wrong things. The first real crack, the one I couldn't explain away, happened on a Tuesday in March. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that, because later, when this whole thing exploded, people kept asking if I'd been suspicious for a while, if I'd been digging. I hadn't. What happened was exactly what the title of the story promises: an accident. Sarah's work laptop died that morning, mid-export on a project due that afternoon. She called me in a panic from the grocery store, asking if I could grab her old laptop from the hallway closet and email her a file from it, an old version of the same project saved months earlier. I found the laptop, opened it, and because it hadn't been used in weeks, it needed an update before it would even connect to Wi-Fi. While it updated, I opened her email client to find the file she needed. And that's when I saw it. Not in her main inbox, in a folder, half collapsed, labeled simply J. I almost didn't notice it, but the icon showed unread messages, 12 of them, and out of habit, the same habit that makes you glance at a missed call you weren't expecting, I clicked it open. The most recent email was from someone named Daniel Reyes. The subject line read, "Noah's parent-teacher conference Thursday at 4. For a second, I thought it was a mistake. Our Noah's school didn't have parent-teacher conferences in March, and certainly nobody named Daniel Reyes was involved in our son's education. I opened the email. "Hey Sarah, just confirming Thursday at 4 for Noah's conference. His teacher said he's doing great in reading but could use help with math homework. Also, Mia asked if you're coming to her dance recital next month. She's been talking about it all week. Let me know." I sat there staring at the screen, feeling the floor tilt slightly beneath me. We didn't have a daughter named Mia. Our Noah did not have a teacher who scheduled conferences in March. and I had certainly never heard of anyone named Daniel Reyes in my entire 11 years of marriage. I scrolled up. There were dozens of emails, going back almost 4 years. Photos attached to several of them, a little girl with dark curly hair, maybe 7 or 8 years old, missing her front teeth in one photo, blowing out candles on a birthday cake in another. A boy who looked startlingly, unmistakably like my own son Noah, same gap between his front teeth, same cowlick at the back of his head, except this boy looked to be about 3 years old in the most recent photo. My hands were shaking by the time I closed the laptop. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Adoption. A half-sibling. Sarah never mentioned a friend who'd named her kid after our son out of coincidence. I ran through every possibility that didn't involve the obvious one, because the obvious one was too enormous to hold. I did not email her back. I did not call her. I closed the laptop, put it back exactly where I found it, and sat at our kitchen table for almost an hour without moving. I'm not a naturally deceptive person. Lying to Sarah's face over the next 2 weeks was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I needed to know the truth before I said a single word, because some accusations, once spoken, can't be unspoken, and I needed to be sure. I started small. I checked the mileage on her car against her stated trip distances. The numbers never quite matched, always 15 or 20 miles over what a round trip to her client should have cost. I looked at our bank statements more closely than I ever had before and found a separate account opened 9 years ago, funded by transfers from her freelance income, money I'd always assumed went toward her business expenses or savings for the kids. I found a storage unit charge, paid monthly, in a town called Alamosa, one of the towns she regularly traveled to for work. Each discovery felt like a stone dropped into my stomach. By the second week, I wasn't looking for confirmation anymore. I was looking for the courage to act on what I already knew. On a Thursday, the same Thursday mentioned in that email, the one for Noah's parent-teacher conference, Sarah told me she was driving down to meet her hotel client. I told her I had a late meeting and wouldn't be home until dinner. Both of us were lying, though at the time, only one of us knew it. I followed her. I'm not proud of it, and if you'd told me a year earlier that I'd be the kind of husband who tails his wife's car for 4 hours down I-25 with a knot in his chest the size of a fist, I wouldn't have believed you. But I did it. She drove to Alamosa, just as the storage unit receipt suggested. She didn't stop at any storage facility, though. She drove straight to a small blue house on a quiet residential street, the kind with a wraparound porch and a swing set visible in the side yard. She parked in the driveway like she'd done it 1,000 times before. And before she'd even made it to the door, it opened, and a little girl, the same dark curly-haired girl from the photos, now maybe 9 years old, came running out, shouting one word that broke something inside me permanently. Mom. I sat in my car across the street, engine off, watching my wife scoop a child I had never met into her arms and spin her around on the porch like it was the most natural thing in the world. A man appeared in the doorway behind them, Daniel Reyes, I assumed, holding a toddler on his hip, the same boy from the photo, the one who looked like Noah. He smiled at Sarah. She smiled back. It wasn't the practiced smile she gave at dinner parties. It was the real one. The one I thought belonged only to me. I sat there for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself drive away. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. I rehearsed 100 versions of the conversation in my head, some calm, some furious, all of them ending with Sarah crying and me walking out with the kids, starting over somewhere far away from whatever this was. I waited for more days, partly to get my composure back, partly because I was a coward who didn't know how to start. On a Sunday evening, after Lily and Noah were asleep, I sat Sarah down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd first sat frozen with that laptop, and I told her everything I'd found. The emails. The second bank account. The storage unit. Alamosa. The blue house. Daniel Reyes. The little girl who called her mom. I expected denial. I expected tears, maybe even anger that I'd followed her. What I got instead was silence, a long, heavy silence, followed by something I never anticipated. Relief. I've been waiting 9 years for someone to find this, Sarah said quietly. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know if I ever could. And then she told me the truth, a truth so different from the one I had built in my head over those 2 agonizing weeks that I had to ask her to repeat parts of it twice, because my brain refused to process it the first time. Before I met Sarah, before college even, she had a younger sister named Claire, 2 years apart, inseparable growing up, the kind of sisters who finish each other's sentences. When Sarah was 22, Claire married a man named Victor, charming and successful on the surface, controlling and violent underneath it. By the time anyone in the family realized how bad it had gotten, Claire had 2 kids with him and almost no way out, no money of her own, no support system, and a husband with connections to local law enforcement that made restraining orders feel like a joke. 9 years ago, Claire finally left. She didn't go to a shelter, because Victor had friends who would have found her in a week. She didn't change her legal name, because that takes time, and time was the one thing she didn't have. Instead, she ran with Sarah's help, and with Sarah's money, to a small town 4 hours away, where she rebuilt a quiet, anonymous life under careful, deliberate secrecy. The Daniel Reyes I'd seen on the porch wasn't Sarah's lover. He was Claire's new partner, a kind, steady man who had no idea what danger he'd married into until long after he fell in love with her. The little girl, Mia, and the toddler boy weren't Sarah's children. They were Claire's, the girl from her first marriage to Victor, the boy from her new life with Daniel. Sarah wasn't mom to them in the biological sense. She was the aunt who showed up so often, who loved them so fiercely, who had been there since they were born, that somewhere along the way, the kids simply started calling her mom too, the way children sometimes do with the adults who show up consistently enough to earn it. Sarah had spent 9 years secretly funding Claire's new life. The storage unit held nothing sinister, just spare furniture and old belongings Claire couldn't yet afford to replace, things Sarah kept just in case they ever needed to move again quickly. The second bank account wasn't an affair fund. It was an escape fund, refilled every month, in case Victor ever found them and Claire needed to run a second time. And the secrecy from me, the lies about hotel clients and work trips, wasn't about protecting an affair. It was about protecting her sister's life. Victor had once hired a private investigator to track down a relative of a friend who'd helped someone else leave him. He was not a man who let go easily. Sarah believed, with good reason, that the fewer people who knew where Claire was, including her own husband, including her own children, the safer Claire and her kids would be. Every secret, every lie, every late-night drive home in silence, had been about keeping one promise: I will never let anyone find you again. I wanted to tell you, Sarah said, her voice breaking. 100 times, I wanted to tell you. But every person who knows is a person who could slip, could be asked the wrong question by the wrong person, could put Claire in danger without even meaning to. I thought I was protecting all of you by keeping you out of it. I didn't think about what it would do to us if you ever found out the way you did. I sat across from my wife that night, completely undone. The story I had spent 2 weeks building, affair, second family, betrayal, collapsed entirely, and in its place was something far more complicated, not a story about my wife's secret love, but about my wife's secret loyalty. A woman who had spent nearly a decade quietly protecting her sister from a violent man, at the cost of her own marriage's honesty, because she believed silence was the price of safety. But here's the twist I didn't see coming, the one that turned this from a story about discovery into a story about consequence. 2 days after I confronted Sarah, Claire called in a panic. Someone had been asking questions around Alamosa, a man at the hardware store, claiming to be a process server, asking neighbors if they knew a woman matching Claire's description. It wasn't Victor himself. It was someone working for him. It took us a sickening 24 hours to figure out how he could possibly have found her after 9 years of careful invisibility, until I remembered something I'd done without thinking. The day I followed Sarah, parked across the street from that blue house, I'd left my own car running for almost 20 minutes in a quiet residential neighborhood where everyone knew everyone. A neighbor, naturally cautious after 9 years of nothing unusual ever happening on that street, had snapped a photo of my license plate out of suspicion and posted it in a local community watch group online, the same kind of group, it turned out, that Victor's investigator had been quietly monitoring for years, searching for any unfamiliar activity near towns where Claire might be hiding. My plate. My investigation. My need to know the truth before I trusted my own wife, that was the thread that nearly unraveled 9 years of careful protection. I had spent 2 weeks playing detective to catch what I assumed was infidelity, and in doing so, I had become the very risk Sarah had spent almost a decade guarding against. We didn't have the luxury of dwelling on blame. Claire and her family needed to move again, fast, and this time, we did it together. No more secrets, no more solo missions. I used contacts from my logistics job to help arrange a moving truck on short notice, under a different name, paid in cash. Sarah and I drove down together, openly this time, no lies about hotel clients, and helped Claire, Daniel, Mia, and the toddler whose name I learned that week was Theo relocate to a town 3 states away, somewhere with no online community watch groups, no nosy neighbors, no trail leading back to license plates. It cost us money we didn't really have, time off work we couldn't easily explain, and an uncomfortable, overdue conversation with our own kids about why Aunt Claire's family sometimes had to move and why it was a secret they needed to help keep, in an age-appropriate, careful way. But it also gave us something we hadn't had in 9 years of marriage, complete honesty between Sarah and me, even about the hardest, scariest parts of her life. 6 months later, Victor was arrested on unrelated charges: financial fraud, of all things, and is currently serving 4 years, which has bought Claire's family a measure of safety they hadn't had in nearly a decade. Sarah still sends money. We still keep the secret. But now we keep it as partners, not as a wife hiding the truth from a husband who would have judged her for it, or worse, accidentally exposed her sister to danger out of sheer ignorance. People ask me sometimes, half joking, if I regret following her that day, if I wish I'd just trusted her and waited for the truth to come out on its own. The honest answer is complicated. I regret the risk it created. I regret the assumption I made, the worst version of my wife I built in my head over 2 weeks of silence, when the real version of her was braver and more selfless than I ever gave her credit for. But I don't regret learning the truth. Because the woman I married wasn't living a double life out of betrayal. She was living one out of love, the fierce, exhausting, self-sacrificing kind of love that asks nothing in return and expects to carry its burden alone forever, if that's what it takes to keep the people you love safe. I just wish she'd let me carry some of it sooner.